Let's pull away at some of this, shall we?
Yeah, we better. How do we feel about the round?
No,
Like if for a newsie, like how's AFL 360 looking?
Oh, there's sort of enough newsy bits once you get the Lynch incident, the SCG turf, and it just wasn't a very good footy round. Should be honest enough to say that, shouldn't we?
Yes. Well, yeah. But there's the delineation, and we'll get to all of this. The delineation of the competition itself, top 9, bottom 9, is going to find us in a very similar position, I reckon, for the rest of the season, because it's just the contenders jostling at the top, and it's everyone else at the bottom probably varying levels of letting go. But I don't think we should expect it to feel that different in the next 5 or 6 weeks.
All right, so that'll be our big issue in a tick. Just give us the buck stops for Victoria Police, Made for More Search Police Careers, because in all of it, there was one shining quarter.
Well, I thought the third quarter on Friday night, the Sydney v Bulldogs game, I thought that game was an excellent display of football. Like the only thing was the surface, but in and around that, the performances of both sides, the players themselves, I thought was next level. But there were 4 that stood out. So Isaac Heaney goes and kicks 4 goals, and hasn't he just elevated himself in the last 18 months? There was speculation. We forget. We sort of feel like he's been here forever, but it's only been 18 months. And it was only when Callum Mills was injured and then there needed some midfield depth that Isaac Heaney went into the midfield. So he was like the ratings, the Champion Data ratings, he had a rating of 14.7 just for that quarter alone. 9 disposals, 5 contested possessions, 2 clearances, 4 goals. Now that 14.7's like, you extrapolate that, it's absolute world record pace. The next highest ranked player in the field was Joel Frazier, and he had 13.6, only 6 disposals, 2 contested, 3 goals. So he just he killed with, or his hurt factor was huge on the night and in that third quarter. Lockie Bramble was 11.8. So these were all guys that had rankings above 10 for the quarter. 15 disposals for Lockie Bramble, 4 contested and a goal. And he just kept finding a way to break tackles and to burst through. As much as his uncontested game is his one would, he was just able to get it done. And I thought Brodie Grundy's third quarter was as good as I've seen him play, even putting his Collingwood years in there. Yep. It was. I'd like someone to do a deep dive on this. I don't reckon there's been a more dominant ruck performance in a quarter than what he was able to put forward. And that's more than just the transition game that we've seen him, prosper in. But he was 10.6, 7 disposals, 4 contested, 19 hit-outs in a quarter, 8 hit-outs to advantage. And we saw a couple of those with Warner out of centre bounce, Heaney. And that's not including the one that he gave to Heaney at the end of the I think it was at the end of the second quarter. So he had 2 clearances of his own. He was... I recognise that version of Broads, and when he gets a sniff, he's away, and he grows a leg. He finds energy that from nowhere, and I thought that was that third quarter was excellent. It was a great game, ebbed and flowed. Sydney won a lot of the key matchups, but the Dogs were able to do it with their lesser lights. Standing up when they needed to, and some key performances. So I thought that was an exceptional 30 minutes of footy.
Give us those ratings numbers again. Just enshrine them.
Heaney was 14.7. Frazier was 13.6. Bramble was 11.8. Grundy was 10.6. I'm not going to be quick enough to get it up, but I would be surprised if I'll give you the numbers, how many players were under a rating of 10 for the whole match. From Melican, Hayward, Wicks, Hines, Lobb, Papley, Kennedy, Harms, Lloyd, Mills, Roberts, Sheldrick, Francis, Buller. Keep going. There's another.
Yes.
There's another dozen. So only 10 players, 10, 12 players had a rating of over 10 for the entire match. And those 4 had a rating of over 10 for a quarter, because you can have a negative rating, of course.
That was an awesome quarter.
Oh, it was huge. I loved it.
It was such a funny game because it had it had the extremes of both. We had a shootout quarter that had so much in it, and then we just had a slog, last man standing last quarter.
But that's great. To me, that's great football because you need to – I say this often and it's hard to understand, I suppose, but you need to win a game more than once against a motivated and a motivated opponent who is up for the fight. You're not just going to knock them out with one blow. And quite often you'll find that if a team that starts really well, we might get this with the Sun, a team that starts really well finds themselves vulnerable because their players, they lull themselves into a feeling of control, and it opens them up to a motivated team coming back and responding to that initial burst. And I thought that these were two motivated teams, had plenty to play for. The Dogs had to go to the well 2 or 3 times to be able to keep the Swans at bay. And the Swans didn't give up. They just ran out of time, which is what a good game of footy looks like.
The third quarter of the Swans Dogs, the buck stops. Looking for a career that gives you more. Search Police Careers Victoria. Police made for more. The big issue is for Oldham construction lawyers, your experts in construction law. The 2-speed economy we have in this competition, which you red flagged last week, and it really is materialising as you suggested.
Yeah, it's a concern. If we project forward, let's go even further. So the difference between 9th and 10th at the moment is 2 games and 20%. And that is because one of the reasons that is the case is because the Giants have a really low percentage compared to the rest of the top 8. So the Giants are at 107, Fremantle at 110, Brisbane are in second at 113. So they've been able to do really well to win the games that they have, but their percentage not as high. It goes up to Adelaide, who are 140%, and in the bottom 9. Carlton have a percentage of 100, so they've just been able to score a little bit more than 100.4, so they've scored a little bit more than defence. But there is 2 games and 20% difference at the end of this round, and I don't think we should expect that that it's going to be any different. But Brisbane will play Port Adelaide up there, and we'd expect Brisbane to win that game. The Suns will play Essendon at Marvel. That's probably a 50-50 actually, if you really look at it. But then with the Bombers' injuries, the Suns should be expected to win that. Collingwood play Carlton, you'd expect Collingwood to win that. And Western Bulldogs play North, and you expect Western Bulldogs to win that. If they were to come to pass, those 4 results, it'll be 3 games and 20%. And that's with 7 rounds left to go or 7 games left to play, what are the bottom 9 playing for? So what are we worried about Essendon's injuries for? I'm not worried about Essendon's injuries. If they were planning, they're a mathematical chance of playing finals in 2025. But let's be honest, let's be realistic. They're not getting there. So we'll spend a lot of time in the next 6-7 weeks talking about the side at the top that's going to finish 9th and miss out. We'll spend a lot of time talking about the various ways that the bottom 9 are going about it, or when they fall off, or when they let go, when they start putting players out to pasture for next year. And you don't blame them at all. And we'll also be talking about, well, what's the Gold Coast Essendon game look like on the round 25 game after the final round. So it's going to be a bizarre little 8-week period. What's
the opportunity missed in your eyes?
Well, what we've sort of mused about this. I'm not sure if it's been on air, but what if there was a playing game? What if there was a 10th spot? And it's so easy to do this in retrospect, but it was obvious and evident, was it not? So if you had those 9 teams playing for 10th, well then that would turn the next 8 weeks on its head. Like Sydney, Melbourne, Carlton themselves, Essendon, St Kilda would be in that mix. They would be, and Port Adelaide would be the teams looking to finish 10th. And if you came with a run and then you play, the only teams that would be disappointed that would be the 7th and 8th place teams that were going to play finals that would have to work, have an extra final to get themselves into the final 8.
That's where the real tension kicks in.
Well, it is. But so there'd be tension between 10th and 11th. You got to finish 10th. There'd be tension between 8th and 9th because you want to get a home final for the 8th. There'd be tension between 6th and 7th because you either you avoid the playing game or you're in the playing game. There'd be tension between 4th and 5th because there'd still be a double chance on the end of it. Tension between 2nd and 3rd for a home game for a qualifying final. So it just sounds like there'd be if we sat here knowing that it was our 7th v 10th and an 8th v 9th game in that what has been the bye period, I think we'd be much more excited about what the next 8 weeks looks like compared to now.
And you couldn't tell me that Sydney wouldn't be, if they were to go on some sort of run to claim 10th, you couldn't tell me on the evidence that we saw of a recuperated group that they couldn't challenge 7th.
No, and it's happened. It has happened. But but I don't think that it's not so much about the outcome at finals. It's not that we think that a 10th team is going to be able to win the flag. That's not why you would advocate for this. That's not what I'd be advocating for. What I'd be advocating for is that you maintain the competitiveness and the integrity of the competition for as long as you possibly could. 8 teams would still miss whatever the postseason looks like. 2 teams would be out of that postseason after 7 days. And then another 2 teams drop off every 7 days until you get to the final one 5 weeks later. That's not a bad way to go about it. I don't think the argument about rewarding mediocrity, you're going to have to, there might be even a 13-win season or a 14-win season might actually have you 9th this year. So
the worst bit is the Tom Lynch episode, and where we find ourselves, the judicial system through the next 48 hours has to prove that it's capable of flexibility the other way. As one day it will have flexibility to minimise things where culpability is low, it must have the capacity to maximise when culpability is high. How have you seen this, Nathan Buckley?
He's a dinosaur, isn't he, Tom Lynch? He's one of the old school key forwards, footballers, make you earn it, and he's always been combative, always played on the edge. So I suppose when you do play on the edge, you're going to go over the top from time to time. I think he deserves a whack for this, and he'll get it. That was outside of the rules. It wasn't. I think he's had a way of putting his body in places and collecting opposition players in a way that is somewhat in the rules, but he's been aggressive about it. I think he's been one of the last that's been happy to hurt the opposition when the opportunity arises. But this one was clearly outside of the rules, and he'll cop his whack.
What intuitively, what is the right whack?
Well, for me, I think it's probably a month. I can't cop if a player who's trying to tackle an opposition player appropriately and aggressively, but then for the rules as they're written gets 3 weeks. So like Curtis one, I can't cop that would be any less than that, and I don't think it's like it was. It wasn't a great punch. It wasn't one of his best. But it was clearly deliberate, and I think the deliberate and intentional nature of it should elevate it. So I can't see it's worth any more than sort of 6, but so I think 4 is about where I think it should settle or will settle.
What about the flow of how it happened and the coach's possibility of intervening, a senior player's necessity to control himself? How do you wrestle and grapple with the build up to that moment?
Well, it's been a long time since you've had to sit in a coach's box and sort of look at a player that's covered in red mist and sort of looks like they're going to break bad. Like, I don't think that has been something that has been prevalent in the game for a long time. I understand it through the 70s and the 80s, maybe the 90s, but it just hasn't happened. You know, whatever the commentary of "you got to get the boy off."
Yeah, it's like
that one. But that's I can't. Look, in the end, Tom Lynch is a senior player. He's an experienced player. He's been in the league for a long time. He's been in high pressure finals. He's withstood and faced high pressure and expectation situations, injuries, the disappointment of that, highs and lows. You are somewhat responsible to moderate yourself when you've been a senior player for a long time. What it probably shows is an overt show of frustration, of disappointment, of less than in himself at that moment, which is all part of trying to moderate those emotions to do your job well. He wasn't having an impact. He was disappointed in that. Like if I'm coaching him, you nearly as much as his actions were clearly wrong, you're sort of checking in with him. You're putting your arm around him, saying, "How you tracking, mate? Like, are you really like underneath your facade? Is there stuff going on here? Are you really struggling? Is it the game or is it something more?" And they're the conversations that Adamuze and his teammates would be having with him. He'd be kicking himself. Yes, last night and today, he'd be kicking himself. He'd be disappointed that he lowered his colours. He did speak, did he?
He did, and he spoke about the frustration he was feeling around the way that he was being umpired.
Yeah, okay.
And the coach did as well. Is there any sort of alibi in that?
No, but we'll quite often go to the excuses that are external to us, in that immediate part to try and defend ourselves. But when the dust settles and he gets a chance to reflect, he'll know that he didn't respond appropriately. It's not a hanging offence as such. Like, he's been a great contributor to the game, but you wouldn't want to see that repeated. And the way that you finish is really important. Like, he's been a great player over a long period of time. He's played at 2 clubs. He's a premiership player. I've loved the way he's gone about it. He's sort of been to me like the aggression has nearly been trumped up. It's nearly not natural to him. It's something that he's had to create because a big bloke's supposed to do that, because that's what his team wants him to do. His coaches sort of extol to him. So I think that it doesn't really, like, he's a really quiet, introverted guy when you speak to him off the field. So he'll reflect, and he's got to make sure that that's the last of it.
There's going to be a lot in it for him on the back end of it. So everyone's got a view. Steve says there's absolutely no way Lynch can get more than 2 weeks, prepared to be disappointed.
And how do you view that?
So if you literally run it through, okay, so it's intentional, medium, high, which should be 2, which then gets lifted on the potential to cause injury. That's pretty straightforward. So intentional, high is 3, but I actually think that's inadequate as well.
Yeah.
So the 2 would be manifestly inadequate, and it won't land there. This is not one of those that's just going to be literally run through, because it had the capacity to be Barry Hall and Andrew Gaff. It's just whether 3 would be enough, whether 4 actually satisfy. This is such a rare moment. Like it's once a decade now.
Yeah, when's the last time you actually saw a player throw a punch? Yeah.
So, and Fizz, Lynch is 5 minimum, very ugly. So it's going to be a tension piece, but you have to set the right punishment and then deterrent in it. And then out the back of that for him is, if he stays at Richmond, it's highly unlikely he's going to be there when they are ready again, because you'd say that's 3 years down the track, and they're doing a really nice job developing. They've hit that fatigue phase of the season. So he's going to have to find a way where that frustration is not going to crush him in the way that we saw yesterday. So this is going to be a look in the mirror moment for him.
Remember, we were talking partway through last year with Richmond and their senior leaders, like Shea Bolton. Yeah, there's just disciplinary issues at different times around the place, and like coming off a long period of success, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to come down and to work out, okay, well, and I like the Brisbane Lions did it, Hawthorn did it, and now Richmond. Geelong have been able to buffer it a little bit, but that idea of how long do you hold on with those players, and especially if you need to go all the way down, as Richmond have, like how do you handle being a premiership player, playing at the pointy end in front of 100,000 people when it matters more than anything else, to having to go again. You go back to the bottom of the mountain literally, and then try and work through that side. I can only imagine the challenge that places on an individual, on a group of players that on a handful that are left that have got to try and work it through. Vlosten's there, Prestia's there, Broad's there. There's a few that are sort of standing up and going about it really well, and quite understandably, there's a few that have struggled.
From the board to management to coach to the leaders to the rank and file. If we've had a bit of a time to absorb what happened on Thursday night, where does your mind go here?
Well, once again, I think this is the tip of the iceberg. What we saw on Thursday is a visual representation of what's happening underneath, and that would be a lot of questioning, a lot of grey area, a lot of. You need to be really clear about what your objectives are as an organisation, and then as a football department, and then as a team, and then the leaders of that team to be able to know, to be able to find the necessary physical, mental and emotional intensity and energy to be able to go out and compete and win. And what we saw in that first 30 minutes, often people would suspect that that's because the players aren't trying. Sometimes it's because they're trying. They're trying too hard, or they're overexerting. But I think every now and then it looks like they're rudderless. It looks like there's no real clear direction, and isn't that understandable when you look at the coaches, the questions on the coach's tenure, the expectations of the season compared to the way the players or the way the season has panned out. The performance of the talented players and the inconsistency in that, injuries. There's so many questions at Carlton, and rightfully so, because their performances haven't supported the talent that they have on their list. But as we know, at the top level of footy, it's not really about it's not as much about the talent that you have on your list as much as it is getting the most out of what you have available, and that's not necessarily, when things are going all your way. It's how are you going to get in the trenches and get your hands dirty and come together? And Vossi's spoken about this, come together when the going gets tough. Carlton haven't done that well enough or often enough as a group in his tenure.
How did you think Michael Voss handled the night?
I thought his press conference was exceptional. I thought his demeanour through the game was good. It's really hard not to become a deer in the headlights in those moments, because it's abundant. You're abundantly aware of what's going on. Your players aren't engaged. He's down. Like it's just before half time when he's on the board. Is that right? It was.
Yep.
Yeah. So you're literally shuffling deck chairs, because if you're in a cockpit, like the red lights would be flashing, the alarms would be going off everywhere. You're not winning stoppage, like all of the KPIs, which pretty much you got to throw out the window. And then you probably, the only KPI you go to is pressure. Okay, guys, we've got to start putting some pressure on the opposition, or contested possession. We've got to start winning the ball. There's just nowhere to go. And I thought he maintained his composure really well through that. He tried to connect with the players as much as he could, but it's almost impossible to connect with a player when they've got that glaze. They're having an out of body experience. So to try and pull people back into focus, to pull people back into some type of organised purpose for that short period of time is very difficult to do. They were able to push back. Like they didn't finish the game poorly. And I thought Vossi after the game spoke really well. He didn't overly blame anyone. He didn't pass the buck. He spoke as succinctly and directly as you possibly can in that situation, without throwing himself under the bus or anyone else. And that comes from a bloke who's a true leader, who's been in tough times before. And I thought in that regard he presented himself as good as anyone could.
We might do this in greater depth on Wednesday, but what needs to have happened in the aftermath of a performance like that, sort of at every level of the club, to find a way to get out of that doom spiral?
Well, I heard your snap judgment and your narrative off the top, and I think that's right. If Carlton can't, I think sometimes you're sort of caught between, okay, if we talk about it, well, then we make it real, and if we ignore it, we might be able to work through it. I don't think this is going to be a situation that can just be worked through or can be ignored and overlooked. I do think that the constituents at Carlton need to be, this is, Vossi, we're going to get to the end of the year, and then when we've got time and space there, we'll have a sit down and we'll work out where we're going to go from here. That gives you a bit of breathing space in the next 8 weeks. It doesn't calm the farm entirely because you're still, but at least it gives some short-term clarity to players, and not just to players but to staff. The other thing is that, like, the staff in the football program are also looking at what's going on, and they're wondering, they've got mouths to feed at home, they've got a family to look after, they've got they've got a professional existence that they've tipped a lot into, and now they're wondering, okay, well, is my position going to be seen as part of the problem here? What's my contribution to the place? So everyone is walking around in this state of, do we talk about it or do we not? What's spoken, what's unspoken? What do we front up to? Because it's really hard to have those hard conversations, but having a hard conversation is okay if you know what the outcome is going to be. You can have hard conversations, but if you're not in a position where you're a decision maker, all it is scuttlebutt, innuendo, what ifs, gossip. You don't want to get caught in that, but that's exactly what it becomes, and it's a difficult place to be.
The pressure index every level at Carlton, having been beaten badly by St Kilda earlier in the season. For 3 quarters, the mode was pretty similar, and they were able to jolt to life around clearance in the final term. So Freo have won 6 in a row. Only Collingwood has done that this season. They've done it on a couple of occasions. They're up to 7 at the moment, which earns Freo the right to a bit of PFI. But that was so important, Bucks.
It was. And like, so the 8-round turnaround was a 73-point difference. So to getting beaten by 10 goals in round 8 to St Kilda, it was an away game at Marvel. And then to go on a run where you play better, you find your game. It just coincides with Luke Jackson sort of jumping out of the ground and him being able to be managed and coached to a position where his best traits just come to the fore, and he's blossomed, absolutely blossomed. So Justin Longmuir and the coaching staff deserve a lot of credit for that. But then what he just spoke of is that maturity and problem solving. That's having to win the game more than once. Like, so St Kilda basically held them at bay. They controlled stoppage. And then when they played keepings off pretty much when they had the ball in their hands, St Kilda. So, Fremantle were able to find a way against a motivated opponent who believed that they knew the way to unpack them. So that's a good win. That's a good win. Their defence has been exceptional in that 6-week period. So if you work back, so St Kilda have scored 69, Essendon 63 points, North Melbourne 67, Gold Coast 64, which was a great win up there. Port Adelaide 51, the Giants 61, which was at NG Stadium as well. So there's a couple of really meritorious wins there that were in the transition between what they were in the first half of the year and what they've been in the last 6 or 7 weeks. So their defensive DNA has stood up. Their midfield dominance has started to come through. Luke Jackson again as a match winner has come through. They look gettable, but they pose an interesting problem for teams because they're so organised defensively, and that just gives them enough of a chance just to have that run at it as they did in the last quarter.
Ross described it as the circadian rhythm of Saints Dockers, the way these games go, which was a nice way to describe it. So to your eye, is it Ross loves coaching against the highly structured opponent?
I do believe so, yeah. If they're really predictable, then they're easier to scout, and then you can come up with a plan that you can think you can pick that apart and take advantage of their predictability. But the challenge with that is quite often the most predictable sides are predictable to themselves as well, and they're actually like what they're going to do, but then you've still got to stop them from doing it. So Collingwood are in that basket, and St Kilda had Collingwood last week, and Ross's comments afterwards were to the extent that it'll be interesting to see how Collingwood progress, because I felt like we had a plan that could have got them, but we just weren't able to execute it for long enough. They probably felt the same, Saints, coming up against Fremantle. Like they normally do unpack them, and they normally do beat them, because Fremantle are very predictable, and you can have a plan that can get them. But I think that's probably where Ross is coming from. So it's one thing to know what to do to beat an opposition. It's another to go out and execute it for 4 quarters, especially when that opposition like that predictability and are efficient in that predictability, and it's a tough it's a tough game to beat, which Collingwood definitely are, and Fremantle are continuing to build towards.
Bit of PFI for Fremantle. There's 6 wins in a row. They sit 6th on the table. You're on duty for the Collingwood game, Collingwood against West Coast, so top versus bottom, which was much closer than most pundits would have imagined. There's a little bit, so I've been overhearing or part of various conversations with Collingwood. So one review has, and this is the best version of the Craig McRae Magpies. I was in the lift this morning, and there's clearly a Magpie fan lamenting that, why don't we beat the lower teams? Why don't we take the soft kills the way Hawthorn did of North Melbourne? And then at footy, one of the dads yesterday morning was just a little bit circumspect around other reviews running a bit hotter than their actual form. They strike me as a little bit of Parkinson's law, where the allotted work, the time allotted to the work expands to fill the time allotted. I just think they're Parkinson's law.
I'll have to read up on that.
They just they use the full allotment of time to make sure they win.
Well, and the fact that it's a 4-quarter challenge means that it's as much about efficiency as it is about top end, and that's the best teams in any year, in any era, are the teams that have got a good top end, but they've got a high low end. Like they can still moderate really well. So, and it shows. So I thought the Eagles were enormous. I loved the way they went about it. They had the tactic on Dacos was to run with and then run off, and Hoff was there for a lot of that, and he had a pretty good game going the other way. They didn't want to they wanted to go at Collingwood, like they wanted to keep the game moving, and I thought their run and carry was excellent. They got a couple of young keys, like that Shanahan kid played his first game, looks likely, like he's so I thought the Eagles, when you go, like I love considering the expectation of performances to understand what we actually see. Like, so the Carlton one probably shows what the expectation is. Like, here's that we're not going to be able to reach the level that people want us to reach this year. So what are we even working towards? There was no expectation on the Eagles, and they played accordingly, but they were able to maintain that rage, and they did it for the majority of the match. The expectation was that Collingwood were going to come in, you probably lead like quarter time by 6 or 7 goals, and then win by 15. I stepped into the modern world on social media, flicked a little thing out on my story, and said, "What do we think the margin at the Blockbuster? What do we think? What do you think the margin's going to be?" The lowest that I got back, and there was an assumption that I was just asking about how much Collingwood are going to win by. I didn't mention it, but the lowest margin that was thrown was 34 points. That was the lowest that Collingwood, and then people were up 80s, 90s, 100, and so that becomes an expectation. You reckon the players don't feel that as well? So it is a part of coaching and leading well to bring back, okay, it's not about margin, it's about what we're in control of. It's about respecting the opposition, understanding that they are going to throw a few punches. How are you going to handle it and how are you going to come back? So that was a very mature performance by Collingwood, but the West Coast didn't lose any admirers with the way they went about it. No Yo, no McGovern, no Allen, no Sheed, No, Tom Cole, who's an experienced player at the back. Owies, who's an experienced player in the front half. Just young blokes having a crack, having a real dip, and it was a good game. I really enjoyed the game to watch it, for the young Eagles players, but also the Collingwood players that had to dig a little bit deeper than they might have thought they had to get the job done.
Give us the overall for Collingwood fans who are trying to plot where they are. Are they sitting pretty 10 points clear? Are they just doing what needs to be done? Are there things there that might get exposed?
No, I think that I'm on record to say that I think that they've been the best performed and most consistent team this season. But I don't have them out as far, like 10 points on the top of the ladder. That's clear. That's definitive in terms of win-loss. But when the whips are cracking come September, that's not the margin between them and the second, third, fourth contender. I think that there's some cracking games that will take place to decide this season. I think their Pies are setting themselves up really well. I do believe that they miss the speed and their high forward. So when McCreary and Schultz are out of the side, the run and carry that we saw the Eagles be able to execute from the back 50, I don't think when McCreary and Schultz are in the team that you see that chain of handballs come to fruition. I think that gets chopped off at the first or the second pass before getting to the third, fourth and fifth and getting over the back. So the Collingwood defence was set up with this expectation of pressure at the front, and I think their ability to pressure at the front was a little bit hampered by personnel. But then we saw after quarter time, Sullivan and Lipinski, they stuck some tackles because they were right there. But McCreary and Schultz and Bobby Hill, they don't have to be right there. They can be a couple of steps off and close it down so quickly. So I think that's an element that Collingwood missed on the weekend, that they rely on to get to their very best. So maybe personnel and injury is going to play a part, as it always does, towards the end of the year.
They're 8-0 against the teams in the bottom half of the ladder, and they've got 5 against top-end teams from here. 5 of their 8 are top 9 clashes.
And we would argue, we've sort of looked at that the opposite. Geelong have seemed like they've got a smoother run where they play more bottom 9 teams into September.
Yeah, so
that was a similar situation last year.
Yeah, so they're 4-2 against the bottom 9, and then they've got 7 of their last 8 against the bottom 9. So they've done all the heavy lifting already against those against the top 9.
Geelong
teams.
have. Yeah. So I mean that definitely has a bit of play on it, but you can moderate the work that you do away from the weekends to get the load in and to build this intensity and your preparedness and preparation for September. But there's nothing like a couple of blockbusters against potential contenders to really sharpen you up.
Line them up.
Yeah, well, I'm not going away from where I was last week, I don't think. So it's pretty up and down. We had a couple of contenders that had buys, so Brisbane and Geelong weren't in there. So and the Giants as well. So I'm going to go Giants 4, Geelong 3, Brisbane 2, Collingwood 1.
Yeah, so the Giants are 9th.
Not a lot of movement.
Seedings.
Yeah, well, I still think that they've got work to do. They've got absolutely got work to do, but I think in a couple of their performances and the fact that they've beaten 3 teams at the top, they may not get there. But I think that their best. I've probably worked that out on what I think what that team's best is, and I think the Giants' best is still a top 4 best.
Yep. I promised to bring the Dogs in if they won Friday night, so I'm going to hold up to that. Dogs at 4, and then Geelong 3, Brisbane 2. Obviously didn't play, and Collingwood continue at 1. So now we'll get back to full rounds, and we can properly shake our seedings up.
You reckon?
Maybe. Why not?
Well, we're going to have a lot. Well, not dead rubbers, but we're going to have a lot of bottom 9. Top 9 games, aren't we?
A whole round of them next week.
But they're all important because what will decide the top 8.
Don't fumble one of those.
That's in between now and then. That is exactly what will happen, and we'll know the team that finishes 9th will have done that. There's no doubt.